This is one of those times I have to remind you, I don't make the news, I just report it. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. Death of the boss chick. That's the focus of today's Soapbox News. Not a lot to unpack here today. Today we're going to talk about what may be the end of an era. Today we're going to cover my favorite show as a kid, The Rabbit Hole, Too Smart for Our Own Good, and Being You. But before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a bell. That's a notifications bell. Click it and it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble, though, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click it and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here with us today. Go ahead and do all of those things that apply right now. When I was a kid, there's a show I used to look forward to all the time. I'm not sure if this was a New York thing or if it was a nationwide show, but I used to look forward to this show called Wild Kingdom. Wild Kingdom was a show about nature. Every week they'd spend quite a bit of time observing the instincts and behavior about animals in the wild. I always found it fascinating. Sometimes the behavior was something I've never seen before. It could be something very unique to the species, like how bees fly 55,000 miles just to make 1 pound of honey. Other times, even though I may have never seen the featured animal in real life, I was simply fascinated how their instincts and behaviors mirrored ours as human beings. Even as a kid, I was keenly aware that as smart as we are as human beings, there's a part of us that acts as though we're above biology. We act as though we don't do things out of instinct or as a matter of survival, just like the wild. After all, we're at the top of the food chain. We're smarter than that. Or are we? I think most people might be surprised at just how simple we are as a species. Intelligent, yet gullible at times. Creative, yet boringly predictable at times. Independent, yet possessing a herd-like mentality at times. If you're just going about living your life like most of us, you might not realize that some of the most fascinating discoveries about us as human beings are revealed by people who study us as a matter of their own profession. Magicians, for instance, are able to astound us every time with acts that seem to defy logic. Well, it's not that their acts actually defy logic, just the opposite. Magicians actually study our behavior so much, they're aware of all of the innate assumptions we make about reality. So magicians just exploit our assumptions. Criminologists use psychology to solve crimes by profiling criminals. A good criminologist can tell you details about the person committing a crime without ever having met them before. Many times they can tell you most likely what profession that person works in, or perhaps even what kind of car that person is likely to drive. How? Because we're human beings. We have certain behavior types and instincts. Even in my profession of sales, I could tell you fascinating stories of things salespeople do behind the scenes, all in an effort to get you to make a buying decision. You're just unaware that these practices are used on you on a daily basis because most of you don't believe human beings have a nature or an instinct. And in many ways, that's our downfall, our blind spot, if you will. Because if you don't believe human beings have a nature, then you start believing you're God and that you could be and do anything without repercussions. This is the current state of our society where we've gone down this slippery slope. In fact, the phrase slippery slope is really more of an understatement. We've gone beyond slipping. We've lost our minds outright. We've allowed men to declare they're women and women to declare that they're men. We've allowed others to declare that there are actually more genders than just men and women. Some claim there are at least 72 genders. We've allowed people to declare they're whatever race they want to be. All they have to do is claim it. Oh, forgive me. Identify as it. Once you've gone down this rabbit hole, it's really easy to lose yourself. Nobody wants to admit that a lot of the mental illness we're experiencing today probably comes not only from being unhappy with who we are, but not ever knowing who we were in the first place. I think the first journey down the rabbit hole may have started with the women's movement. It started out innocent enough. I mean, women should be allowed to vote, right? That makes sense. I mean, you've probably heard me talk about this before, how every legitimate movement eventually got hijacked somehow by the Democrat Party. What started out as a woman just wanting her God-given right to work or vote eventually turned into this man-hating feminist movement. Now, I don't know if you believe in God or not, but even if you don't, I think we can probably all agree that men and women work beautifully together when we're raising a family together, not hating one another. After the wave of feminism started, came the idea that every job that a man applied for, women felt the need to apply for, which sounds very good in theory, but is actually horrible in practice. I used to work for a famous delivery company that wears brown. There were a handful of women who worked there, and I can tell you the company almost always made concessions for the women because they just physically couldn't do the job. Now, the women are probably unaware of the concessions being made, but all of the men could see it. It was the equivalent of affirmative action where someone wasn't really qualified, but the company just put them there because it looked good. But long before lesbianism and transgenderism was a thing, it became obvious to anybody with eyes that some women weren't just trying to have equal opportunities as a man. Some women were trying to be men, in every sense of the word. It's very clear when we see our society now. It was only a matter of time before this mindset filtered its way into our music, into the era of the boss chick. There's a feeling among some women that men are just intimidated by strong women. That's actually not what the conversation is about at all. There's been a number of successful women in a variety of areas. Nobody has a problem with that. What we're discussing today is, over the years, a different kind of woman has emerged. It's the kind of woman who talks like she's been on this planet all by herself. She doesn't need anyone. She's never had anyone help her. She has absolutely no need for friends. She's done everything all by herself, and the thought of children actually slow her down. She is the boss chick. Now, I don't know who started this boss chick thing, and I don't think it's just one person. I think there have been a few messages here and there, and women over time have just fashioned their own woman out of it. Not that I'm blaming her, but one of the first people to come to mind when I think of this is Beyonce. Do you remember that song, Can You Pay My Bills? Can You Pay My Telephone Bill? Remember that song? While there were other songs that preceded it, that seemed to be one of the songs many women were singing, and it prompted an even stronger message coming from women. The stronger message coming from women was either pay my bills or shut up. Let's pause here for a minute. What many women assume, but it's not true, many women assume that if there's a group of married men and there's a single man amongst them, they assume that all of us married men are envious somehow of the single man. And that's actually not necessarily true. In fact, I've experienced the opposite. Many married men will look at the single man as someone who's less disciplined. When you say someone is committed to something, that word implies someone who is mature and dedicated. An older person without a family is someone who's generally regarded as someone who is lacking discipline, commitment, and therefore lacking maturity to a degree. The women's movement combined with popular music sparked an era of women who started referring to themselves as boss chicks. Now, if you're unclear what a boss chick is, just tune into almost any so-called reality television show nowadays. Whether it's Keeping Up with the Kardashians or the Real Housewives of wherever, you're bound to run into one of these shows that feature the self-absorbed career woman who has almost zero interest in a relationship or family. It's almost like a marketing company did a focus group and found out that this is what women will buy, and so they've packaged it up nice and neat, and this is the same women that they've been marketing to women for decades, to the point that they almost look the same, whether they're selling them through television or selling them through music. And for a while, women were eating them up like candy. The more television shows they produced, the more women watched. The more the music industry made these songs, the more women listened. But then I started to notice something. Every action has an equal or opposite reaction. On the male side of the aisle, men went through something I call the pimp era. The pimp era was the era of men dressing like pimps and treating women like prostitutes. This is the era when you saw a lot of rappers with their hair pressed like Outkast. This is the era when you saw the Snoop Dogs and the Cat Williams. If women were taking the attitude of pay my bills or shut up, then men were making it very clear that they weren't going to pay a damn thing. And just so nobody turns this into a race thing, white men had their own version of the pimp era. I started seeing a lot of videos back then popping up in my feed for something called MGTOW. I didn't know what MGTOW was, but the more I did research, the more I discovered it stood for men going their own way. Now, these weren't gay men. These were just men who were tired of what they had been experiencing in relationships with modern women. They were dead set against marriage with this new era of women. There were a lot of these videos everywhere. And just for the record, just so you know, I thought what the men were doing in response were just as toxic as what the women were doing. None of this stuff was good for humanity or building strong families as a nation. Something had to change. And all of that history leads us to where we are today. Instead of complaining about women, The pimp era started to go away, the MGTOW videos started to fade, and now what we're starting to see is a new type of video emerging that people are calling the Manosphere. The Manosphere is different from the pimp era. It's different from MGTOW. Instead of complaining about women, a lot of videos are now gaining popularity by opening a dialogue with women regarding the very thing that I opened up the start of this episode with, and understanding that both men and women are uniquely different. And instead of fighting these differences, embracing them. One of the first influencers I witnessed in this space was a man by the name of Kevin Samuels. Now, he passed away before I got a chance to learn much about him, but there are still a lot of his videos in circulation. What was interesting about Kevin Samuels is that a lot of women hated him, but at the same time, a lot of women were listening to him.
It's best to date, not just to have a relationship. You don't have to put a title on everything, Kevin. That's what you need to start telling these people. A title, you don't.
No, I need to. What I need to do is I need to direct people to this video and show you what's wrong. You don't need to put a title on nothing. It needs to just be free flowing. Yeah, yep. And over here, stuff works. Where you at, it don't. You don't need to put a title on everything. You can have babies out of wedlock. You don't need to be married. You can do what you want to. Mm-hmm. We're the only community that operates like that. That's why you got to take power back from these mindsets. Have you ever opened up something at the building and it came with instructions?
Of course.
And it came with parts?
Of course.
The way you're talking is you just start doing shit. You don't need the instructions. You don't need that. Just start putting shit together. Uh-huh. You want to live on the 5th floor of a building like that?
You got me sweating, Kevin. I'm going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I got to go.
He had a format where women would call into the show, tell them their problem that they were dealing with in a relationship, then Kevin would interview them and give them his assessment. I've seen a number of his interviews and I can see both sides. I can see why some women found his information to be very educational, and I can also see why some women didn't like him. He wasn't very gentle with his words sometimes. But those types of videos sparked a whole new generation of videos that were aimed at helping modern women who have seen their relationships go by the wayside in pursuit of this boss chick lifestyle. Another very popular personality in this space is a guy named Andrew Tate. Now, I've listened to a number of Andrew Tate's videos, and Andrew's one of those guys that you have to listen to with caution, because most of what he says is deadly accurate, and I agree. But some of what he says is appalling, and he sounds like an R. Kelly in the making. So don't take this as an endorsement. For the purposes of this video, I'm only talking about the areas where he's given advice that I happen to agree with him on. Here's an episode where one of these boss chicks is asking his advice regarding what to do about men who can't handle her.
Oh, please, sir, can you help me out? I'm trying to find a husband, the kind of beast that can handle a woman like me.
Well, this is another point, right? And I'm only answering generally, right? Because this is the first time I've met all of you ladies. You've all been very polite to me. You've all been very nice. I'm just talking generally. And I'm going to answer it based on your last sentence. Your last sentence was handle a woman like me. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the average man's life, like I just discussed earlier, how difficult it is, how competitive he has to be, and how many problems he has to fix. Do you think he wants to handle any woman?
Okay, so...
Do you, like the idea of any degree of problem? It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Like the point of having a woman as a man, for me at least, is for her to be my peace and quiet. My life is stress. You see me, I'm rolling around with security teams and I got problems and they're after me. And when I come home to my chick, the last thing I want to do is have to handle anything. I want her to just sit down and her make me happy. She used to be my positive energy. She used to be my sunshine in the rainstorm.
Okay.
So you're talking about him handle you. I don't know. I can't answer the question exactly. But if you're sitting there constantly arguing over small points or correcting him, or that he's probably thinking, this is a battle. I don't have the energy for another fight.
The good news is, as abrasive as Kevin and Andrew can be sometimes, women were still listening, which is a good indication that this era of the boss chick may be on its way out. When I posted the title of this show on social media, one of my friends chimed in and told me to proceed with caution. I assured him it certainly wasn't my intention to purposely try to offend women. I explained to him that this episode was less about my opinions and more about what women themselves were saying about this boss chick culture. And the clearest sign that this message was no longer gaining popularity is what I witnessed when Ciara debuted her new song on Twitter.
Okay, so Andy, can you play it from your acapella, play the girls from your acapella up front on the first half, and then on the second half, drop the beat in?
Yeah.
This is for the girls getting money. This is for the girls that don't need no man. This is for the girls that's in love with themselves. This is for all the girls that done did it by themselves. This is for all the girls that's INDEPENDENT. This is for all the girls that been living stress-free. This is for all the girls on a mission like me.
As soon as I heard the lyrics, I instantly went to the comments section. Some women were happy she released new music, but there were also a lot of women who were dragging her for pretending that this was her life. Here are just a few tweets that I read from women. The girls didn't ask for this. These female artists are always making music about not needing a man and be in whole relationships and marriages, be having y'all out here looking crazy and single. All the girls on a mission like you? You have a husband and trying to push single womanhood? You're a pathetic hypocrite. The message these women were conveying is that they resented being sold a lifestyle that these artists don't live themselves, Ciara actually being happily married with children. I've heard the same argument leveled against Beyonce. Even though she made a song called Irreplaceable where she kicks a man out of her place and tells him all of his things are packed, in real life when Jay-Z cheated on her, she sat down with her husband and worked through it without letting it destroy her family. Women are starting to have more mature conversations about the fact that if they really want to be happy, happiness isn't going to come from the 5 Gucci bags or the Porsche. They're realizing that this living stress-free, as Ciara says, only occurs in the lives of people who never risk anything. While there's nothing wrong with a handbag or a luxury car in and of itself, women are starting to discover that it's not the key to living a fulfilling life. Ladies, can I tell you something that you already know? Remember that phrase that the grass isn't always greener on the other side? Well, that phrase is true when it comes to men also. Stop trying to be the female version of us. I want you to hear a conversation that Jordan Peterson had with a feminist who was trying to debate him one day.
So that's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance of society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
Very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper-successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
But I could say equally well that most rape victims are women. Terrible things happen to people of both sexes.
And you could say that with perfect utility, but that doesn't provide any evidence for the existence of a male-dominated patriarchy. Well, it just means that terrible things happen to both genders, which they certainly do.
But there are almost no women who rape men, for example. So that is an asymmetry there in sexual violence.
Well, yes, there's an asymmetry in all sorts of places, but that doesn't mean that Western culture is a male-dominated patriarchy. The fact that there are asymmetries has nothing to do with your basic argument.
No, but you might equally...
This is a trope that people just accept. Western society is a male-dominated patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. That's not true. And even if it has a patriarchal structure to some degree, the fundamental basis of that structure is not power, it's competence. That's why our society works. It's only when a structure degenerates into tyranny that the fundamental relationships between people become dependent on power. It's not power. If you hire a plumber who's likely to be male, it's not because there's roving bands of tyrannical plumbers forcing you to make that choice. And it's the case with almost every interaction that you have at the face of our culture. You're dealing with people who are offering a service of one form or another, who are usually part of the broad middle class, and what you're looking for is the person who can offer the best service, and you can find it. It's not a consequence of being dominated by anything that's tyrannical. And then again, our culture, our Western culture, which is by no means perfect, and certainly has tyrannical elements, like all cultures do, is the least tyrannical society that's ever been produced, and certainly the least tyrannical society that exists now. This whole patriarchy thing, I think you have no idea how pernicious and dangerous it is.
Well, no, I don't. I really don't. Go on.
Throughout history have fundamentally cooperated to push back against the absolute catastrophe of existence. A terrible death rate, the probability of chronic starvation, early death, disease, the difficulty of raising children with all the death that was associated with that, and to look backwards in time and say, well, basically what happened was men took the upper hand and persecuted women in this tyrannical patriarchy is an absolutely dreadful misreading of history. It's a terrible thing to teach young women, and it's a horrible thing to inflict upon men.
Does any of that sound like a reason to be envious of men? Does any of that sound like a person you'd like to swap places with? I heard something from Joe Rogan recently that made me think about the state of being a man. Maybe women should listen to it.
That most men live lives of quiet desperation. It's one of my favorite quotes ever because it's true. And I've been that guy. You're just in this world where you just can't wait to just run away.
How do you think they get stuck there?
Bills.
Bills? Like financial bills?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Bills and commitment. You have an apartment you have to pay for. You have a wife that you have to feed. You have a child you have to raise. You have your mortgage. You have your this. You have your that. And that's where it all comes from. The way you can change is you have to put aside enough money to give yourself a window. And then you have to have a plan. And you have to spend all your waking hours outside of whatever job you do planning your escape. And you have to come to the realization very clearly that you fucked up and you got yourself stuck. So whatever you're doing, you have to do it like your life depends on it. Whatever time that you have to attack like you're trying to save the world.
In other words, ladies, we all play the cards that we're dealt. Don't be in such a rush to switch places with people, especially when you're not really built like that. Now, many of you know my show centers around politics, so on the surface, this would seem like it's out of my wheelhouse, but it really isn't. You've heard me mention how movements get hijacked by politicians. This is a classic example of women who started out leading a movement and ended up being led into something that they never wanted. Now they're wondering how they got here. Since people say I'm pretty good at breaking things down, here's my 2 cents, ladies. I'm sure you know men find you attractive for a number of reasons, one of them being you're feminine, of course. In that same vein, you're curvy. Men like that, right? Let me give you an analogy so you can understand what's at issue. I want you to imagine for a second a guy who wants to date you, and he's quite feminine. Maybe even more so than you. I want you to imagine for a second a guy who walks and he has the same sway in his hips as you do. Now let me ask you, is that the man you want to marry? Now, unless you're gay and find that feminine behavior attractive, you probably said no. The reason you said no is because what you want is a man, right? You don't want someone who's just like you. You understand that? And that's all men have been trying to say for the longest time. When we admire you for your beauty and your difference from us. We don't want to be you. And that's where we differ. Boss chicks admire men so much so that they're almost trying to be a man. And that's unattractive to a man. Because while you may still be attractive physically, a long-term relationship with you has all the aspects of dealing with another man. Quit trying to rationalize it by saying men can't handle you or they're intimidated by you, yada, yada, yada. They're not intimidated. They're just not gay, and it doesn't feel natural. You get that? This is why a lot of boss chicks tend to end up in relationships where the men are either undercover gay, we see that a lot, or they end up in relationships where the men are submissive. And here's the irony. The men that are submissive are the type of men you're going to leave anyway because he's not the man you had hoped for. And the reason he's not the man you had hoped for, because all of the men who are manly the way you'd like aren't attracted to you because they think you're manly too. Does this make sense? I was watching a good interview one day and they were having a conversation about the reason why you shouldn't live with your spouse before marriage. They said that atheists believe that faith is really suspending rational logic and replacing it with some absurd ideology. And that's really not what faith is at all. Faith is what makes moving into the unknown possible. And that's one of the reasons why living together isn't a great simulation of marriage, because couples who do that, what they're trying to do is make the unknown known. If you're making a commitment to someone, at some point you have to move into the unknown because that's where your relationship is going. But you can't go into the unknown without faith. When you fall in love with someone and you decide to marry them, you don't have the evidence that this person is right for you. What you have instead is the joint decision that come hell or high water, we're going to struggle through this together. The way you call the best out of yourself and the best out of your spouse is by giving them the gift of faith. It's by saying that as flawed as we both are, if we commit to each other, we have the possibility of being more than who we are. And I'd like to do that with you. The more committed you are to that faith, the more likely it is to work. If you think about life in general, the people who we're the most envious of are the people who are committed to something. But understand, you don't commit because of the evidence. You commit because of the faith. Now, the only reason why I told you that story is because the motivation for people to live together first and the motivation of the boss chick is very similar. Many people live together first because they see it almost as insurance. It's like, let me live with this person just so I can see, just in case this doesn't work, just in case they do something that I don't like, right? Well, I got news for you. Marriage is intended to be forever. That's a long time. Of course, they're going to do something you don't like, and forever. When you ask most boss chicks why they're hustling 24/7 and have to start businesses and do all this work all the time, it's very similar to the living with someone mindset, right? The reason they're spending so much time with these businesses all the time is because they always have this, I'm doing this just in case he does something I don't like. So then I know that I'll be fine. I can always leave, right? It's the same kind of insurance mindset. Well, I got news for you. When you poll most men about why they're hustling 24/7, the answer is almost never in case she leaves me. So I'm not saying that the work in and of itself is the problem. I'm saying the motivation for all of this work could be the problem. Because if you're using it as a parachute or escape hatch, that's a bad thing. And my last point is this. Now, I rarely ever talk about my own personal relationship, but in this case, I will. My wife is very feminine. So much so that I've noticed that whenever she's around me, it almost brings the protector out of me. I'm very cognizant of when she's doing things that may bring harm to her. I don't care if it's standing on a countertop so that she can reach something or if it's her going out late by herself. When I see her in those situations, I want to step in between to make sure she's going to be okay. I don't open my wife's car door because she can't do it. I open my wife's car door because I want to. I only mention this because I imagine in the relationships where women are trying so hard to be masculine, I imagine the dynamics has got to be different. I imagine that a boss chick has got to be signaling that she's fine. Whatever it is, she got it. Well, sooner or later, someone's going to respond to your signals, and the signals that you keep putting out is that you got it, and so they don't feel the need to protect you. They don't feel the need to take care of you, and it's all of the things that you never wanted, and yet you project. Now, I'm not saying this applies to all women, but especially in this era of Instagram models, a lot of these boss chicks are really trying to be something that they're not. And there honestly is no reason to be, because if you poll most men, we love you as you are, as confusing as that may be sometimes. That's my 2 cents. It's funny how we're the smartest species on the planet, but sometimes it feels like we're just too smart for our own good.
With Dad back and providing ample food, the lioness can eat enough to produce plenty of milk to satisfy the insatiable appetites of her growing cubs. Under the watchful eyes of a powerful father and a resilient mother, the cubs have the best possible chances of survival to adulthood. With security coming from working together, the small pride is an excellent example of how lions benefit from group living.
Even animals realize some things are just basic common sense. The male is the strongest, he takes the risks, and he provides. The female is also extremely important. She ensures the care and the future existence of all of us as a species. The moment you start questioning that and thinking you got a new plan, God has a funny way of making you realize you don't know what you're talking about.
There's a bunch of girls like, you don't need no man to help you raise no child. You don't need no man. Shut the up with the bull. Yeah, you could do it without a man, but that don't mean it's to be done. You could drive a car with your feet if you want to. That don't make it a good idea.
I'm glad to see more women calling things out for what they really are. It's an attempt to get votes, it's an attempt to sell TV shows, it's an attempt to sell music, but it's a horrible way to raise a family. Somewhere in the middle of all of these influencers telling us what to do, we've forgotten to love ourselves and what's really important about life. It's not just what we've acquired in our lifetimes, it's also what we've left behind.
I was at my grandmother's 93rd birthday. I looked there. My grandmother had 9 children, because there was my father and 8 more. They all had a bunch of kids, blah, blah, blah. I stood there and I looked at my 93-year-old grandmother, and there was a whole room full with maybe 70 people that came from that one woman. Isn't that remarkable? Yeah. That nobody cared about her career. Nobody asked what job she did. Nobody asked how many times she went to the club. Nobody asked if she had time to go to festivals. No, you had 70 sentient beings, including myself, full of life from one woman who dedicated herself to being a mother and a good wife. That is beautiful. And if you sit here and genuinely think that you're going to work your ass off through your fertile years, and by the age of 54, you're not going to be suicidal alone with a cat, then you're dumb.
So there wasn't a lot to unpack in this episode, but it was an important one. In this episode, we uncovered my favorite show as a kid. We talked about how one of my favorite shows as a kid was Wild Kingdom, because I was fascinated by the fact that every species has a biology to it, a way of living that's allowed it to survive all this time. We said the problem with mankind is, unlike every other species on this planet, we question our own existence. It's this questioning sometimes that leads us down rabbit holes, and we'll feel the repercussions for generations. Too smart for our own good. We said it's ironic that we're the smartest species on the planet, because sometimes it makes you wonder if we're too smart for our own good. Because we've taken something so simple, a 2-gender dynamic that has existed for thousands of years for the purpose of raising families, and we've all but destroyed it by replacing it with this 72-gender ideology that's come about in the past 10 years or so. We've taken this 2-gender dynamic and replaced it with the idea that men can be women and that women can be men and that children can determine their own sex even though their brains have barely developed. Finally, we talked about the fact that life is really cyclical. Sometimes the lessons that you've gotten away from have a way of making it back into your life. Sometimes after you've tried everything else, the wise words of your mother or grandmother still seem to be ringing in your ears. Maybe it was that talk about how important family is, or maybe it was that talk about making sure you're doing the right things for the right reasons. And that's where I'll leave it for now. If you're new around here, our channel is both a combination of podcasts, long-form understanding of conservative principles, and soapbox news, videos where you get on your soapbox about the latest news of the day. Be sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here with us today. We'll see you next time.
So, you're a philosopher?
Yes.